I'm Meta Spencer, and today I get to have a conversation with an old friend, pretty old friend. I think we've known each other maybe 30 years. Have we, David? Something like that. David Webster,
Hey,
I knew when I think you may have been a high school kid at the time. I'm not sure. Anyway, you were a young man, very active in something called Act for Disarmament during the 80s when I was also sleeping on the floor at Holy Trinity Church trying to supervise kids who were spray painting all over the carpet, as it were.
okay.
Remember? I don't think.
Memories.
Yes, memories. I don't think you were one of the spray can guys, but it was a bit of a problem. Anyway, all right. It's great to be back in touch. Since then, you've had some developments in your life. You are a professor of history at Bishop's University in Sherbrooke, Quebec. Hello, David.
Hello, Meta. Thank you for inviting me to be on the program. And
Wonderful.
yes, it has been a long time.
Yes, it has. And we are going to talk about, of all things, the World Health Organization, right? Because last summer you sent me a student to work with me as sort of an intern for a while, and he was taking a course from you guys on the history of pandemics. And I thought, what a wonderful idea. I wonder how many other universities are teaching such courses. So I got back in touch with you and said, would you do one of your lectures for my audience? And you said, well, we divided up the work. And so different people taught different parts of it. So you're going to tell us something about the origins of the World Health Organization. Is that right?
That was the plan. I'm not planning to do a lecture,
Yeah.
but
Well,
we
thank
can
God.
talk.
I don't think our audience wants a lecture, but we will
No,
chat.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the reason I think it's super interesting and the reason I think that we kind of started talking about doing the course and teaching the history of pandemics during a pandemic is we're just over a century after the first great pandemic of the modern time, which is the so-called Spanish influenza of 1918 to 19, where there were three waves, and particularly the deadly second wave hit around the world in devastating fashions. And a lot of the themes of that period are still relevant today, and of that epidemic are still relevant today. And when you look at the publicity materials put out at the time by health authorities, there's a lot of similarities.
I think they're actually taking kind of guessing what's going to happen in the future based on what happened last time, right? I mean, they predicted there'd be a second wave just because with the Spanish flu, there had been a second wave. By the way, I did a talk show on the Spanish flu.
Excellent.
Did you know that? Patrick Boyer gave a talk about the Spanish flu in Muskoka, Ontario. That is what the town, how the town reacted to it, and so on. It was
Nice.
yeah, it's very interesting. Anyway, yeah. So
Yeah, and the
indeed,
response has made such a difference around the world. So some countries like what's now Western Samoa, it was a British colony back then, and some 90% of the population is infected with influenza, and some 30% or so die as a result of this epidemic. Whereas in American Samoa, they went into quarantine and handled it really well, and very few people were affected. So even in close by territories, you can see the different effects
sure.
resulting from different responses by
Well, I've heard
authorities and people.
that more than or about the same number of people were killed by the Spanish flu as died in the war. Was
More. Yeah.
war? Was it more? No
Yeah,
kidding.
we talk a lot about the war, but we do not talk a lot about
Oh,
the Spanish flu, which is a topic, of course, we discuss with the students in the class. So they say that more than 50 million people died, and a third of the world population was infected. That's even more devastating than the Great War, the First World War in Europe, and outside of Europe, considerably more devastating.
yeah.
So,
My
maybe
mother
we need to think not just about the Great War, but about the Great Pandemic.
right.
And
Mother mentioned that her father, I don't know whether he had it or he was in the business of burying people. But, I think in all, she lived to her 90s, but I think that was the only time she ever mentioned the Spanish flu, like in passing. And isn't it strange that it's not a topic that people talk about more? And it
No,
sure was a lot worse than COVID in terms of the death rate.
because there's no vaccines back then, and there's much less information about healthcare. And this is why, our actual topic, the growth of the World Health Organization and even its predecessors, is so important, because the idea of a coordinated international response isn't even there in 1918. It was a coordinated international response to the Great War. There's not a coordinated international response to disease, which is seen as just something each country handles for itself within the country. And you get this and you realize the idea that health is a matter for one government alone or one country alone is completely inadequate to the challenge that's being faced, the vast number of deaths. So Persia can't deal with the epidemic. Millions die. Persia, now Iran, for instance.
Especially hard hit.
Especially hard hit, yes. They have, they try to be neutral during the Great War. They're not allowed to be neutral because they're invaded by both Britain and Turkey during the war. There's an enormous famine that results because food prices are soaring, and consumers in which then Persia are priced out of the market and can't afford to get food. So they say up to 10 million deaths from the famine, and then they get hit by the disease and everybody's already weakened from famine. So yes, it's one of the worst spots affected. And so national governments can't deal with it. So you need an international authority, and you get one. The League of Nations Health Organization finally formed in the aftermath, right?
So that's where the WHO came from.
The WHO is the successor to the League of Nations Health Organization. Just the League of Nations, as you know, is not successful in keeping the peace of Europe. So the United Nations is the successor organization and a much more successful successor organization. But before the World Health Organization, you have the LNHO, the League of Nations Health Organization, which is...
Never heard of it before.
Yeah.
How long did it... Well, it couldn't have lived very long. 10 years? How long?
Well, it's formed early 1920s effectively. It does a lot of very successful work in the 1920s and into the 30s, although the world is falling apart in the 30s as we drift into the prelude to the Second World War. I mean, the League of Nations officially isn't abolished until 1945, but it's pretty much done by the time wars broken out in Europe in the 1930s, right?
Well, did its health organization have any power, or did they, was it just a paper organization? Did it really do anything?
Yes, it did something. What is power in international affairs? That's always a question, right? Does the League of Nations Health Organization have the power to dictate to any national government? No, it does not. Does it have the authority to make changes? In many ways, yes. So it's in charge of things like declaring when there's an epidemic. It's in charge of, most importantly, information sharing. So part of the, and I mentioned then British Samoa earlier on, right? Where it was really badly hit. There was no information coming in. So in American Samoa, they locked it down and they had information about what people could do to reduce the chance of catching influenza. In British Samoa, New Zealand Samoa, I guess, effectively, they have no information and many more people die. And so that, as we know right now, the key to prevention in many ways is good information and good disease transmission reduction. But information is so important, and the League of Nations Health Organization is in charge of information. And it's in charge of standardizing that information so that everybody knows what they're talking about. And it's in charge of providing technical assistance to some countries who don't have access to as much information as others. So the information flows throughout the British Empire and the French Empire. German information is vital. German transmission by telegraph across Germany and Central Asia into Europe is crucial. The League of Nations Health Organization has information offices in, for instance, Singapore, that are able to get out really good, really quick information to many parts of Asia that are not as easily reached and may not be colonized even. Not that colonization is a good thing, of course, it's a very bad thing. But so this transmission of information and this transmission of accurate information, because there's stresses on accuracy, shows it's almost a science for peace operation, right? Except it's science for disease prevention. So information can be crucial. And I hope that's one lesson that was learned, is the importance of information transmission, and that you're all speaking the same, not literally the same language. You speak many languages, but the same scientific language about this is a disease. This has been shown to be effective. So the standardization and the information flow is vital.
Yeah. Now, this information idea, how much denial was there? Was there any organized political opposition to the information that was being sent out? Were there any Trumps of the day saying it's all a hoax, or don't worry about it, you'll live through it, it's not very bad, don't wear a mask?
Right.
What was the general public opinion, and what did the authorities, were they all united in what they advised?
Depends on the country.
Oh.
So if you look at my favorite posters from the time in Canada are the ones that have instructions on how to make your own mask out of cheesecloth right on the posters, which is kind of an interesting way to use a public poster campaign, I think. So that's an example of effective communication, right? Whereas, here, let me read you this quote, okay? When epidemic, this is from the publication in Britain. The UK handled this fairly badly. There's a lot of denial. When epidemics occur, deaths always happen. Would it not be better if a little more prudence were shown in publishing such reports instead of banking up as many dark clouds as possible to upset our breakfasts?
Oh.
So the British are very concerned about their breakfast being untouched and free of worry, right? So there's some criticisms of those who are pushing active strategies to deal with the disease as being alarmist, certainly. You know where that quote comes from?
The word? No.
That quotation comes from, that's the British Medical Journal.
Oh, no kidding. All right.
So,
wow. Well, then, I would have thought
the UK is hard hit as a result. So they got 250,000 deaths by the end of 1918, right?
I would have thought maybe it was a prime minister or something, because what the disaster sociologists report is that the most certain thing you can find is the authorities will say, don't tell people the whole truth, because they'll panic, and the panic will be worse than whatever the problem is that we're trying to address, which is not true. It's the opposite of true. The people themselves have a tendency to deny. Therefore, so you don't usually get the whole truth, but it's the authorities who kind of twist or deny the most at the beginning. Yeah. I never heard of the Medical Association doing it, though. That's astounding.
Well, it's an article in the British Medical Journal. I won't say the Medical Association as a whole endorsed it necessarily, but I don't know. Do you think maybe there's a lower trust in in government messages these days, or health authority messages? Because it feels like there used to be a lot more trust, or maybe in Canada there is more trust than in the United States.
Yes, for sure. I think
although I've got the experience.
I've run into people who don't trust science, even here. Yeah, it's part of the make America great again populist mentality, anti-elitism, and physicians are elite, so knowledge is something you have to watch out for, because they're going to try to take advantage of you, these smart ass people.
Yeah. So I guess that's why we hear a lot of distrust in the World Health Organization, partly because of that, and partly because people don't trust. No international, you asked earlier about power, no international organization has actual power to enforce anything. The World Health Organization can't enforce anything, so people criticize the role of the government of China in it, for instance, right?
Yeah, there was this thing early on, which I didn't really understand, the notion that somehow WHO had been corrupted by or compromised by China, because China was giving more than its share of money to support it, or something like that. I didn't even follow the argument very closely.
I would have thought giving more money than you have to would be a good thing. But
yes, but if you're looking for reasons to distrust somebody, I guess you could say, well, they're buying their way into power and influence by giving more money. I'm not even sure that I'm telling accurate report on what the debate was about.
I always respond to that sort of thing by saying, well, if you're looking at the donors' influence in the World Health Organization agenda, then you better look at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is a leading, they don't just get funding from governments anymore, although that was the original model. They got private foundation funding, and of course Gates is huge.
I know that Gates is doing their own research, but I didn't know that they were also funding WHO.
Yeah, they're a major donor.
Really? Okay. Good for them. Oh boy.
It's I think it's a sense of stepping in as the US government was shirking,
Mm-hmm.
But I'm only speculating by making that guess.
Okay, now tell me, let's go back to the moment when somebody thought we ought to have something like an international organization to coordinate health efforts. How did this all happen?
Well, I'll talk about the WHO, I guess. I mean, they're forming international organizations along with the UN, and global health is clearly going to be a concern. And they in many ways, when they're making the UN system, they just inherit the old League of Nations system. So there was a League of Nations Health Organization. It provided all sorts of basic information. I mean, Polish doctors were going off and doing medical work in China, and it's creating huge global circulation. So they thought, well, let's have a World Health Organization as well, alongside
let's go back
all the others.
These Polish doctors. What inspired them to go to China and tell me?
The need for healthcare and the interest of the Chinese government at the time. So the head of the League of Nations or health organization is Ludwig Brockman. He's a Polish doctor. And they're just, the government of China is very interested in receiving assistance from overseas. Mm-hmm. They identify healthcare as an area. Perhaps if they get more healthcare aid from international organizations, they will rely less on Canadian and US and British and other missionaries coming into the country and building hospitals. And China's in a very bad shape right then. And the League of Nations Health Organization is wanting to try out its methods. So China's a good place for it. And that continues after the war too. I mean, the World Health Organization does a lot of work in early China.
This was before the war that the Polish doctors were going there?
Yeah, 1920s, yeah.
In the 20s, and a whole bunch of them?
I don't know how many. No, I mean Rockman is the classic case because he's the mastermind behind all of this.
Who is it?
Yes.
Who?
Sorry, Ludwig Rockman.
Never heard of him.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of interesting people who go overseas that are not heard of, right? So yeah. I mean, interesting people. I got to give a Canadian, right? So the first head of the World Health Organization is Dr. Brock Chisholm. And he's a Canadian doctor, a psychiatrist, actually.
That name I do recognize.
So Chisholm is he's one of these Canadian internationalists that you hear a lot about.
Yes.
And I mean, you probably know some of these people yourself. Not Chisholm because he would have been far too old, but the next generation after that, you'll know a lot of people who did overseas work, right?
I know a number of people who had been brought up as missionary kids in China,
for instance.
And they seem to have been a wonderful generation of people. Mary Thompson was one.
Mary Thompson, for instance, yes. And these are the internationalist tradition in Canadian foreign policy is carried more by these people than it is by many governments of Canada, right? So.
Now, Brock Chisholm, was he one of those, or was he a physician, or what? I know the name though. Somehow it sounds very familiar, but I don't know.
Yeah, he's one of those names, right? So Chisholm is he's a Canadian psychiatrist who does some healthcare international work during the war, and that leads him into being the first director general of the WHO when it's formally founded in 1948, and he has some controversies while he's there. He has some fights with various governments, but in many ways, the arguments that he was having remain current, and in many ways, I think he was correct in the answers he gave. So,
elaborate his views.
So, I mean, Chisholm, well, one of the ones where he won fairly early on was that if you're working for the United Nations, who is your real boss? Where does your real loyalty lie? And he was saying it needs to run to the United Nations and not to your national government, right? So
Mhm.
I serve the UN, even if that means I will from time to time oppose Canadian government policy. For instance, and this was a battle fought out early on, particularly during the McCarthyist years in the US, because that's where the League staff all live, right? Where the UN staff all live. But ultimately, this is won by the idea that, Chisholm's idea that people working for the WHO work for the WHO and not for Canada or whatever government it is successful.
He was a major
He was
proponent of that idea.
He was carrying that amongst other ideas, and he's carrying the idea of. Today we talk about wellness, right? So, do we have a social approach to medicine that's based on wider causes, or do we stick to a narrow biomedical approach based on a treatment focus, right? Mm-hmm. And Chisholm is pushing we need a social approach. So we need to think about the fact that malaria is a disease of poverty. Mm-hmm. And to really tackle it, you need to think about the causes of the disease. And you need to find ways, apart from spraying people with DDT, mm-hmm. that will help to reduce the virulence of malaria and help to ultimately free areas. And these are environmental and social ideas. Whereas early on, the US government in particular is talking about the stress on the biomedical approach, which is we're going to stress treatments. We're going to search for magical bullets. So when there's an epidemic, we're going to prioritize the vaccination. And there's nothing wrong with vaccination. Obviously, it's a very necessary tool, but it can't be the sole tool in a wellness-driven agenda. And Chisholm, being somebody whose focus and training is in mental health, is much more interesting in mm-hmm. doing human health holistically, like body and mind together, and humans embedded in their society, and less focused on just what's the scientific fast solution to this. So.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that my impression, based on no evidence or no knowledge at all, is that approach is becoming more important now. I talked, for example, to James Orbinski, who was founding the school at York University on what I guess they call global health, and that's the orientation they have. It's
exactly
a lot of social factors besides the technological aspects of medicine. Yeah,
there's enormous technological factors. My grandparents' family comes from the Tennessee, Virginia border area. So where Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina all come together. So the Appalachians, and mm-hmm. There's memories there of when there was a malaria zone. Mm-hmm. How was malaria eradicated in the United States? I mean, malaria eradication comes with the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is a social program and an economic program about standards of living for people in the US South. But it also was an integrated program, and it, for instance, ends the days when malaria is endemic in the United States in certain regions.
I think my father had malaria when I was little, maybe 7 or 8 years old. I remember him lying in bed shivering. The whole bed would shake.
The shakes, and that's what they called it,
hearing the word malaria, but I don't remember anything about whether he was saying he had malaria. I think that's what it was, but my memory of, as a kid, I didn't know what it meant. So it would have been endemic. Is that right? This was Oklahoma. It wasn't.
Oklahoma, yeah, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. There are things like that.
That's funny. We think of these as diseases of the poor world, but they're also, until they were attacked, they were diseases of the wealthy world as well. Not that Oklahoma, when you were growing up, was wealthy, but compared to Malawi today, there's a certain assumed standard of living, I guess we should say, right?
Well, yeah. Okay, it's one of those things I never thought to ask. Did you teach the lecture on malaria in that course that you taught last summer?
I did some on malaria, but our best content on malaria is from a recent bishop's graduate, Marek Eby, who was talking about malaria in Soviet Central Asia. So there's somebody you should definitely talk to.
Okay, maybe I should have a talk show with him. But I know that in some programs, work global public health programs, malaria is treated up there right with HIV. It has the same kind of level of concern as if it's still really a thing.
Yeah, well, it's a thing. It's much less of a thing than it used to be, and it's not when the WHO set about picking diseases that they wanted to eradicate, and they were very successful. I mean, they eliminated smallpox as of I think 1980 was the last case in Somalia. So they successfully eradicated smallpox, and that's the WHO working with national governments on an integrated global plan. So smallpox used to be a big thing, and now we don't worry about it, right?
Absolutely. And I know Larry Brilliant, who his book is called Sometimes Brilliant or something like that. And he was, I think he said he was the last person to see a person with smallpox. It was a 4-year-old girl in Bangladesh or someplace that he saw. But at the end, he was the person sort of in charge of this big program in India that did the final stamping out of malaria.
In India was such a major case for this campaign. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and then he became for several years, he was the head of the Skoll Foundation's pandemic program. And now they've switched over to something called Ending Pandemics, which I believe he's sort of like the honorary president of, although I don't know that he does administrative work. But you'll see him on TV. I've seen him probably 10 times since this COVID thing has been going on. Somebody being interviewed about the history of stamping out smallpox or his concerns about how to end pandemics in general today. Yeah. They have a good outfit. It's called Ending Pandemics. And again, it's funded by Jeffrey Skoll, the guy who, I guess he was the eBay man, inventor or something of yeah. So anyway, okay, so they found this thing, and well, you say it doesn't have any power, then it must get all its funding and support from donor member organizations, is that right? Did every country in the world join it?
It's a fairly universal organization. I could not say for certainty that every single country in the world has joined, but it's pretty universal. And they hold their annual they hold the World Health Assembly periodically, which is like the global parliament of health. It's like the UN General Assembly, essentially. So it's got fairly high buy-in from the global community. I mean, I look at a little country like Timor-Leste is an enthusiastic participant in the World Health Organization. They've worked very effectively together in the current pandemic, which
you're in touch with people in Timor, right?
Yeah, and so this is a country of about a little over 1 million people now,
well, I know
about two decades of independence, and there's almost no cases, despite the very poor healthcare and the fact it's the poorest country in Asia, and they've got some really good low tech answers to the pandemic. There's not a lot of running water everywhere, but they have tippy tap foot operated hand washing stations where you just get a little bit of water tipped over your hands and operate it with your foot, wash, tip a second time to rinse, and it's a good little operation. That's the National Health Ministry and the World Health Organization and others just working together on very simple operations like that. And sometimes sometimes the low tech can be as useful as the high tech until you wait for vaccines to become available. So, and it's well controlled at the moment. Could change any time, but
I'm interested in your connection there. I know that you were very engaged with the politics of getting liberation for East Timor, and you made it. And I guess they're doing okay. Is that it?
That's all. Yeah, yeah. It's okay. There's no perfect governments. There's no perfect countries, but this is fully operating democratic state, which is rare in the region, and this is a country with a growing standard of living and without mass famine anymore.
And you've written a lot about the history.
A lot of work still to do, but
yeah, but you stay in touch with these people a lot, right?
Yes, we have a my next Zoom interview is later today about LGBT plus rights in Timor, which there's a very active civil society campaigns on this issue. The government hasn't come around yet, but it will. These things take time, as we know from Canada, and happening. Yeah, but I always use Timor-Leste or East Timor as the classic example of proof that there's no such thing as a hopeless cause in international affairs. Because you get it here. You had a tiny country. It's invaded in 1975 by Indonesia. It's annexed the following year. Indonesia, supported by both the United States and the Soviet Union at the same time. The Indonesian army is dropping Soviet-supplied napalm from US-operated planes. And then you've got this tiny country, and it is a classic David against Goliath struggle. And yet, just by persisting and fighting mostly non-violently for their independence, they actually achieved it against incredibly long odds. And so if that's possible, then anything's possible.
It is. And they had really good friends. They had Noam Chomsky, as I recall, who was always
Noam Chomsky.
Yeah, early on, he was the one who was only person I knew who was talking about the situation of the Timorese. Yeah. And then you were there.
And he got that from one of his students at Cornell. Sorry, at one of
MIT.
He got it. Yeah, he was at MIT. He got it from a student who was at Cornell, but by Cornell professors, and they kind of created a little group. But it's also partly because there were Timorese who were able to be at the United Nations in 75 and 76 and let a few Americans know about it. And then Chomsky was like, this is a perfect example of what's wrong with US foreign policy.
Well, it's great to know
that's he and Edward Herman writing about it, right?
The dissident intellectuals once in a while can make a difference. And
once in a while.
There you sit in Sherbrooke, Quebec, making a difference, David Webster. Thank you very much for it.
Likewise.
Thank you for talking. We will have another conversation one of these days, maybe about malaria or who knows what. Okay?
Okay. I look forward to it.
Thanks so much, Dave. Bye. Thanks. Take care. Bye.